All right, everybody.
Thanks, Anand.
Welcome everybody. Really pleased to welcome Sid Suri from Microsoft Research today. Sid is a longtime friend, and at one point, same institution colleague when I spent a summer at Microsoft Research in New York. He's a senior principal researcher there at MSR in New York. He's done a ton of work on networks, human behavior. He's also one of the pioneers of virtual lab experiments using Amazon Mechanical Turk. And today he's going to talk to us about a book that he wrote with Mary Gray about gig work. So with that, I will please remind you to turn your videos off and to mute your microphones so that we can make sure not to distract Sid or anyone else. And Sid, as I mentioned, I can assure you we'll all be listening. So really excited to have you, and take it away.
Thank you. Thank you, Sinan, for the kind introduction. Thanks everyone for spending the next hour with me. I know there's a lot of things you could be doing, and it's an honor to be in front of you today. I'm going to be talking about ghost work. And this is, by ghost work, I mean two things. I mean the human labor that powers modern AI systems, and I'll get into what I mean by that in a minute. And I also mean, by ghost work, I also mean a book I recently published with Mary Gray. I'm a computer scientist at Microsoft Research. Mary Gray is an anthropologist also at Microsoft Research, and we teamed up to write this. And so let me start by talking about, I'm going to give you two reasons why you might want to study ghost work, and we'll get to the definition of it, of exactly what I mean in 1 second. So the first reason you might want to study ghost work is the rise of the on-demand economy. And there's dozens and dozens of on-demand labor platforms out there, and I chose these for a reason. They exhibit the range of different kinds of on-demand work. Amazon Mechanical Turk is a typical, most of you are familiar with it. It's a typical microtask platform. Tasks include things like translation, transcription, that kind of thing. Everybody here is familiar with Uber and Lyft. Upwork, for those of you who don't know, it's a freelancing platform. Typical tasks on Upwork include things like content creation, software development, customer support, that kind of thing. And then at the higher end of the spectrum, there's companies like BTG and Second Shift, which really focus on like long-term engagements, things that take weeks and months, corporate branding, corporate strategy, that kind of thing. And the reason why I chose these four, like I said, is they exhibit the range of on-demand work from the micro to the macro. On closer to the micro side, like I said, there's image tagging, typical things you see on Mechanical Turk, driving, Uber and Lyft, content creation, typical tasks you might see on Upwork, and corporate strategy, things like Second Shift and BTG. And so the point I'm making here is the on-demand economy is not an industry, and it's not a sector. It's way bigger than that. It's a new way to do work that cuts across industries, and it cuts across sectors. But despite this sort of wide range of different kinds of tasks you can do on these platforms, there's one unified mental model you can have in your head that sort of gives you one unified way to think about all these platforms. On all these platforms, there's a task creator, someone who creates the task and puts it on the platform. There's the task doer, someone who does the task, and generally speaking, the platforms do some kind of matching between the creator and the doer. And the point I'm making here is, if you view it this way, more and more work is coming through an API. And that brings me to sort of one reason why you might want to study this kind of work. And that is, it's growing. First of all, it's already a huge part of the economy. Back in 2016, which was 4 or 5 years ago, 8% of the US population did some form of on-demand work. That came from a Pew survey that we partnered with Pew to do. Mary wrote most of the questions for that section of the survey, in fact. And then McKinsey, they have a slightly different definition of on-demand work, but nonetheless, they estimate it could add 2% to global GDP in just a few years. So like I said, so that this is one big reason why you might want to study this kind of work. And it also brings me to the exact definition that I want to give in front of you today. By ghost work, I mean tasks that are sourced, managed, delivered, and billed through an API. That's a very abstract definition. So just to make it more concrete, I'll walk you through that definition with Mechanical Turk in as example, and I'll focus on mturk for a lot of this talk, but the book we deal with 4 platforms that I'll get to in a minute. So on mturk, there's a requester. They put a task on the platform. The task is called a hit, a human intelligence task. Workers come and do the task. And in fact, requesters can post many hits and many different workers can come and do many different hits. And the point I'm making here is with this diagram is that the API comes between the worker and the requester. And different platforms do this to different levels, and mturk is on one extreme, and that is it really obfuscates everything about the worker to the requester. All the requester sees, at least a few years ago anyway, all the requester sees is the worker's unique and anonymous identifier. They don't know anything about the worker. Are they good at math? Are they male or female? Do they have lots of friends? Are they Muslim, Hindu, Christian, whatever? They literally just know that unique identifier about them. And this fact that this API comes between the requester and the worker is going to be kind of one of the underpinnings of this talk. It's going to come up over and over again. So that's one reason you might want to study on-demand work. It's part of the on-demand economy. It's here to stay. It's definitely, and it's projected to grow. And I'll give you the second reason you might want to study this kind of work. And to do that, I'm going to have to give you a little bit of a history review of Amazon and mturk itself. So I need you to rewind in your mind back to the early 2000s. Oh, and the other point I want to make here is this history is a little bit murky. It's not written down perfectly clearly anywhere. You sort of have to pull together a few strands here and there and kind of piece it together. So back in the early 2000s, Amazon was a bookseller, a young bookseller, in fact. And what they were doing was collating databases from various publishers, and they would use that to feed into their own database. And they had various database curation problems, like detecting duplicate entries was one problem. Another problem was like, does this cover image go with the first edition of this book or the second edition of this book? Another problem they had was, does this review make sense? Is it grammatically correct? Does it have any swear words in it? That kind of thing. And they tried to solve these problems using just algorithms and machines, and they couldn't get it to work. And so their solution was to use a hybrid of human-machine computation, and they built a platform where they could put these tasks on the platform and workers could come and do them. And in true Amazon fashion, they ended up making that platform externally available. And in 2005, that was Mechanical Turk, and it launched. And in my opinion, the single biggest innovation here was that Amazon gave a way to hire human labor through an API. And I think that innovation is going to have ramifications for many years to come. And again, that's going to be one of the sort of underpinnings of this talk. Okay, so that was in 2005. Now I need you to fast forward to 2007. At this point, Fei Li, a very famous, prominent AI researcher, she was a professor at Princeton. And she and her team, she wanted to solve the object recognition problem in artificial intelligence. And for those of you who don't know, the object recognition problem is a very simple problem. It's given an image, you give the algorithm an image, and it tells you the central object in that image. So if you look at the top image in this diagram, the algorithm would output soccer ball. The middle image, the algorithm would output school bus, and the bottom image, the algorithm would output coffee cup. And Fei wanted to solve this problem using machine learning. And she realized, and obviously you're going to need training data to do that. And if you don't know what training data is, I'll get to that in a minute. And she needed lots of training data, like on the order of millions. So she did what any professor would have done. To start, she hired undergraduates to label these images. And at the rate the undergraduates were going, it was going to take 19 years to get enough data. So that obviously didn't work. And then she heard about Mechanical Turk. And then she realized, aha, this is the thing I can use to get the labor I need. So she used mturk, put all the images, the training data set she needed on the platform. And over the course of a couple of years, got 50,000 workers from 167 countries to label 32 million images. And the workflow that they established was so good, and the workers were so good. The data, this is considered a gold standard data set. It's called ImageNet. It's a collection of images and tags indicating what is in those images. And it's highly accurate. It's considered pretty high accuracy. And Feifei, in her genius, didn't stop there. She went one step further. She used that ImageNet data set that the workers built, and she hosted a competition every year. And every year, scientists and engineers would submit their algorithms for the object recognition problem, and the algorithm with the lowest error rate was declared the winner. And what I'm plotting here on this graph is the error rates of the best algorithm of that year. And as you can see, it steadily declines. And what you don't see, though, is why. And the reason, the innovation, the algorithmic innovation that drove these error rates down was the rise of deep learning. And as everyone's heard about in the news, the media, and the hype, is that the rise of the AI revolution fueled by deep learning. And what caused that rise? If you read the rhetoric, what you read about is that cheaply available data and cheaply available computational power fueled deep learning, which caused the AI revolution. And my argument is, they're actually leaving out one thing, and that is the human labor. Without the workers who labeled all those images for ImageNet, we might not have had this deep learning revolution, and we might not have the AI revolution we have today. In my opinion, MTurk workers are the unsung heroes of the AI revolution. Nobody talks about them, but we should definitely value their contribution because it was big. And that brings me to the second reason that you might want to study this kind of work. It's the fuel that provided the fire that is the AI revolution. And I'm going to give you now 2 examples of ghost work from our data. The first example starts off with Google image search. So I did a Google image search for camelback couch. And for those of you like me who didn't know what that means, a camelback couch is simply a couch with a curved back. So how did Google image search know that if I type in camelback couch to return me pictures of couches with curved backs? The answer is machine learning based on training data. So at some point, the Google image search algorithm was given hundreds, if not thousands, of pictures of couches with curved backs labeled camelback, and pictures of images of couches with straight backs labeled regular couch, so that when it got a picture that it hadn't seen before, it could say, is this image more like the images that I have that are labeled camelback, or is it more like the images that I have labeled regular couch? And in this case, it would say it's more like the ones labeled camelback, so I will guess that this new image is a camelback couch. So where did this training data come from? And the answer is people like Justin. Mary and her team, I should say, interviewed Justin, and he said he was a stay-at-home dad, and he did this kind of work so he could watch his kids and not have a commute and be present for his family and earn money at the same time. And he said, I had to spend an enormous amount of time on Google trying to look up these terms to figure out what they meant. Like me, he didn't know what a camelback couch was, and he had to look it up to figure it out. And I should say, when Justin was doing these tasks, we don't actually know who the employer was. So I don't want to imply it was Google image search or not. It was some employer was trying to figure out was trying to get some training data about camelback and non-camelback couches, and they hired Justin to do it. I just used Google as a sort of example there. And I'll give you one more example. Think about the last time you looked at your Facebook feed or your Instagram feed or your Twitter feed. Do you ever wonder how they enforce their no hate speech, no adult content, no graphic violence policies? Well, the answer is obviously algorithms. And as we've seen, algorithms, especially machine learning algorithms, need training data. Well, where do they get that training data? And the answer is people like Lalitha. Mary interviewed her. And at the same time, I think her 2 sons were nearby. And in the context of this interview, Lalitha, I think, was doing some of the work, and she was doing content moderation over text and about text. And the word in question that she couldn't recognize was the word chick flick. And if for those of you who might not be familiar with American slang, chick flick is a word to describe a sort of stereotypical movie that stereotypically appeals to, female audiences. It's not considered an adult content word, but she didn't know that because it's slang. And she said, so she asked her sons, is this word adult content or not? And she said, they are more qualified to recognize these words than me. I need their help to keep the internet clean and safe for other families. And this is probably, I'm going to give you a lot of quotes during this talk. And this is probably my favorite one. And the reason it's my favorite one is it says so much and so little. First of all, the first part, they are more qualified to recognize these words than me. You think when you're hiring a worker on Mechanical Turk, you're hiring one person. But in this case, you're not. You're hiring three. You're hiring Lalitha and her two boys. Secondly, is the second part of the quote. I need their help to keep the internet clean and safe for other families. She's taking pride in her work. She views herself as kind of a custodian of the internet, and she takes pride in that fact. And a lot of people don't associate pride with this kind of work, but it's there and the workers have it, and they, quite frankly, they deserve it. Okay, so I've given you two reasons you might want to study ghost work, two examples of it, and let me tell you a little bit now about how we studied it. As I mentioned, my co-author, Mary, she's an anthropologist. She would interview workers, and she would get this very rich interview data, qualitative interview data, and it would tell us what to measure. And I'm a computer scientist, and I would gather experimental data and observational data to measure what we found in that interview data to see how widespread it is and put a number on it. And we're going to go around this cycle probably 3-4 times during this talk. And what data did we gather? About 2 years of field work, almost 200 interviews, a few thousand extended worker surveys. We did dozens of behavioral experiments and social network analyses with thousands, and in some cases, tens of thousands of responses each. You'll see examples of pretty much all of these as this talk goes on. We studied 4 different platforms. The first one was Amara.org, and Amara.org is a hybrid volunteer paid platform, and they do captioning. So if you ever watch a TED Talk, I think Sinan has a TED Talk, in fact. If you ever watch a TED Talk, you should go watch Sinan's after this. They do the captioning for it, and they also do the translation for it. So especially if you watch a TED Talk in a different language, they probably did the captioning for it. Lead Genius, they do sales lead generation. So for example, if my company sells widgets and I need to know who in your company is responsible for buying widgets, that's known as a sales lead, and that's one of the primary tasks they do there. MTurk, everybody's familiar with. Like I said, it's a microtask platform. And UHRS. Every internet company that I know of has their own internal crowdsourcing platform. And UHRS stands for Universal Relevant System. It's Microsoft's internal crowdsourcing platform, and we used it as a way to stand in to the others. Like I said, it's a microtask platform. It's kind of, you can think of it as kind of like a proprietary internal version of MTurk, just for the purpose of this talk. In the book, we go into the differences in more detail. Okay. Let me just pause real quick. Any questions, clarifying questions I need to handle now before I get into sort of the data and what we found and that kind of thing?
No clarifying questions. I think you're good.
Thanks, Dave. All right. Okay. So the first, we're going to go around this cycle one time right now, and it's going to be a kind of a warm up, pretty easy trip around the cycle. Why, you might ask, why do people do this kind of work? The interview data is going to get us some quotes, some explanations, and then we're going to see how widespread was the intent explained in that quote by analyzing some survey data. So Kamuda, she lived near Chennai. She said, my father, we asked her, why did she do this kind of work? She said, my father wanted more for me than he had growing up. Seeing me succeed, becoming the highest earner in my village made him very proud. Okay, Kamuda grew up in a, so first of all the names are fake. These are not people's real names. That's one thing. Second thing, she grew up in a village where, and at a time and a place where it was not a default to educate girls, but her father did it anyway. And she became the highest earner in her village doing this kind of work. So the first point I want to make is we're not talking about college kids earning beer money. We're talking about real money that had real value to people. That's one thing. Second thing is one of her goals when she was using this money for, aside from supporting her family, was to build a school in her village so that more girls can get educated. So we're talking about real world impact. And unsurprisingly, if you look at our survey data and you say, what's the primary reason you do this? Across all 4 platforms, the most common reason was to earn money. That's no surprise. The primary reason I do my job is I have to put food on the table. But the second and third reasons are also going to be very interesting. Okay, Carmela, she said, quote, I can make money wherever and work on things that matter to me. I want to be able to travel and pursue choreography. All I need to do is take my computer with me. And if I get a job assignment, I'm still working. I'm living my ideal life. So like I said, she was a choreographer and she wanted to fit in this kind of work around her choreography gigs. And when I say around, I mean temporally, but also geographically. And one of the reasons I like this quote is a lot of people might have some bias that a full-time job is the gold standard that everyone is trying to go for and everything else is lesser. And I want to shatter that bias if anybody on this call had it, that for many people, this is actually what they want to be doing because it allows them this kind of flexibility. It allows them to to be flexible about when they work, who they work for, what they work on, and that kind of thing. And so we lump those kind of reasons into one called self-determination. And yes, it is definitely a second place to earning money in terms of why people do this kind of work, but it is nonetheless present across all platforms. And then third, Virginia, her field was global affairs. So for her, learning many different languages was very important. And I believe she was a Amara.org worker. And she said, I can speak decent Arabic and French now. I couldn't do that with any other job. It's like being paid to go to language classes every day. So she was doing this to build her skill set. And again, we found that self-improvement, building one's skills, was a common reason across the 4 platforms. Again, after earning money, but still common, still present. Okay, so that was the first sort of go around that cycle. So, okay, so now you're a worker, you want to do this work. How do you go about getting it? How do you go about doing it? And what we're going to see from the anthropology and data is that workers feel the need to be on call. And then we're going to put a number on how much they value a little bit of flexibility in terms of their jobs through a behavioral experiment. Okay, so Natalie, she lived in Queens, and I believe, if I remember right, she worked on Lead Genius, but I'm not 100%, my memory's a little foggy on that one. So she says the first worker or workers to respond to a post get the job assigned to them automatically, which was a little frustrating. It made me feel like, oh, I don't know if I'm actually going to be able to get work. And so this seems a little puzzling at first glance, right? At first glance, it's like you go to MTurk or Upwork or really any of these platforms, and it looks like there's hundreds and thousands of jobs to do. Like, how can it be that she needs to feel to be on call to jump on a task? And I'm gonna answer that question in just a couple minutes. But everyone who's put a task on one of these platforms knows it. The second you put it up, you get tons and tons of workers right away. And basically the Natalies of the world sort of jumping on it. So we wanted to sort of put a little number on that and ask the question, how much would workers value a little bit of flexibility in terms of when they get the job done? So what we did was we posted a task, and it was a very simple task, a sentiment analysis task. We gave workers an Amazon review, and we said simply, is this a positive review or a negative review? That's it. And we had a 2x3 design where the 2 and the 2x3 was how much time we gave them. And so half the workers got a minute. So basically you could do this task in a few seconds, and half the workers, were given a minute. So you get the review in front of you in a minute, just say was it positive or negative. And the other workers were given 24 hours. So just basically do it when you feel like it. And we also varied the pay rate 3, 4, or 5 cents. Workers could do as many as they wanted, up to 100. And we had 1,800 workers do it. 300 across the 6 treatments. And here is what we got. So on the x-axis here, I have the pay rate. On the y-axis here, I have the number of tasks they chose to do. So first off, the green curve is how many they chose to do when we gave them a day, and the blue curve is how much they chose to do when we gave them a minute. Okay, now, so what you can see is the 1 day treatment is shifted up from the 1 minute treatment. And I'm just going to give you some back of the envelope numbers here, just for the sake of brevity. And at the 4 cent mark, it's about a 7 task shift up. So that what I'm trying to say is at the 4 cent level pay rate, giving workers a day meant they did on average 7 more tasks. Okay, well, how much does paying them 1 more cent do? Well, going from 3 to 4 cents resulted in a 5.8 task increase. Again, roughly speaking. So if giving them 24 hours gave them got 7 more tasks done, giving them 1 cent got 5.8 tasks done, more tasks done. What is the value of flexibility? It's simply just back of the envelope, 1.2 cents per task. And already you can just see, comparing 1.2 cents to 3, 4, and 5 cents, that's a pretty substantial amount of the pay rate. A. And B, like I said, the average, I think the mean was about 20 or 30 seconds to do one of these tasks. But if you're much more conservative and we say, assume a worker took 50 seconds to do one of these tasks, you're talking about $1 an hour in a world where, like, we're, making between, $6 and $10 an hour is considered pretty darn good. So workers value this flexibility quite a bit. The next point I wanted to make was we actually we looked at how much workers valued flexibility in terms of how much time they spent on the platform. So we asked them, how many hours did you work last week? And the workers that said they only had 0 to 10 hours, we couldn't measure that, we couldn't separate their value, their flexibility from 0. The workers who said they worked between 11 and 30 hours, they valued it about $1 an hour. And the workers who said they worked 30 plus hours valued it about $2 an hour. And so the more time they spend on the platform, the higher they value this flexibility. Okay, let me pause one more time. Any questions I can answer about that?
There was one question, which is basically insofar as the self-determination score that you measured for UHRS is higher, how much of that is because a lot of the workers on that platform might be internal employees who already have some kind of employment through Microsoft, and so they don't have as much of a need for money?
I don't have the exact population figures, but the number of workers directly who are Microsoft employees is very small compared to the number of workers who are hired by third parties. So to be just a little bit of detail there, to be a UHRS worker, Microsoft doesn't hire you directly. They hire a third party who hires the worker. And so very few of them are actual Microsoft employees. Okay, I'll carry on. So you might think, why are the workers on call? Why do they feel this need to be on call? And what we're going to see, give a little evidence for that. And there's these markets are heavily concentrated, and I'm gonna give a little evidence for monopsony as well. So what's the evidence of requesters' market power? Why do the requesters have the majority of the power in these markets? So some evidence is, like I said, the workers are on call, and another piece of evidence is the workers they bear the cost of looking for work. And these are transaction costs the workers bear in work that I have sort of under review right now. Workers spend about 1/3 of their time looking for work and doing tasks that they don't get paid for. They only get paid for the labor they do. There's about a 1/3 overhead on top of that they don't get paid for, and it just decreases their hourly wage. Secondly, here's an old screenshot, but the requesters set the wages. It's listed right here in the reward column. There's no bargaining. It's a take it or leave it kind of situation. And another piece of evidence for the requesters' market power is that the market is extremely concentrated. Only less than 10% of the requesters post over 90% of the tasks. This has been true for a few years, not just the tasks, but even the groups of tasks. So the market's heavily concentrated. So and then what we did was we wanted to put a number on this. And we wanted to measure the, economists call it the wage elasticity. It's a fancy term. It just means for a given change in pay, what's the change in people that show up? And so if the workers are wage takers, then if you change the pay, then it kind of doesn't matter. They have to take the wage anyway. So there's not going to be a big change in labor. And so basically what we did was a kind of a honeypot design where we recruited participants, randomly divided them into 3 groups, and randomly gave them different pay rates. And we measured the fraction of workers that came from each group to do the task. That's how we did it experimentally. We also did it observationally using a double machine learning model on some scraped data, but I'm not going to get into that today. And just an intuitive, what I'm showing here is the red dots are dots that we got from different experiments that measured this. And the blue dots are the dots that we got from the machine learning estimates. And if you take the weighted mean, you see the wage elasticity was 0.14, generally considered pretty low. So a 10% change in pay resulted only 1.4% change in the amount of labor that workers that showed up. This was done with a pair of labor economists, Arun Dubey and Suresh Naidu, and Jeff Jacobs, who are wicked smart and really fun to work with. So yeah, okay. Now let me get to, this is actually kind of my favorite part here. So we talked about why you might do this work, how you might get it, why there's this need to be on call. But now, how does the work get done? And what we learned from the anthropology data is that workers collaborate. And then what we did from the CS side is we measured how widespread is this and what are the effects of it. So I'll start off with the anthropology data as I've done before. So Mary interviewed Sanjeev with his college buddy next to him. And he said, if I'm working and I find a good hit, then I call him and tell him about it. And she interviewed Fareed, and he said, anyone who sees work posted calls and tells everyone. There's no fixed timing. Whoever is alert and sees informs everyone. In this way, everyone helps everyone else. And he's talking about 150 friends on Facebook. Okay, so worker sees a good task and they give it to their friend. Okay, this is interesting, right? So we wanted to map this network. And let me just start by saying this network of sort of collaboration around MTurk is not in some data set that you can download. Excuse me, it's not in some API that you can scrape. We had to sort of incentivize workers to tell us who they work with. And here's how we did that. It's a task that we put on Turk, and it had 5 steps. The first step was workers create a nickname for themselves. This was to preserve their anonymity. The second was to complete a brief demographic survey, just 9 questions, age, gender, that kind of thing. And then the third step was to tell us, they answered 2 more questions for us. One question was, why did you start doing work on MTurk? And 2, how do you stay motivated? And where do these questions come from? Through a pilot study, those were identified as the questions workers most want to know about other workers. Okay, then we said to the workers, swap nicknames with whoever Turkers you know, whatever Turkers you work with, just swap nicknames however you want to do it. You can IM them, you can email them, you can text them, whatever, through whatever channel you want, just swap nicknames. And then we gave them a UI where they could put the nicknames of the workers that they knew. And once they did that, going to the last step is, so like, let's say I got Sanan's nickname and I would put it in and I could see the answers to Sanan's demographic questions, the ones he wanted to share anyway. And I could see why he starts working on MTurk. I could see, how he stays motivated, where he's from, that kind of thing. And I could kind of explore the network that way. And so, like I said, we built a hit for the workers to anonymously self-report who they talked to. We paid them $1. It just took a few minutes. And then workers really responded to this hit. In a matter of a few weeks, 10,000 workers came and did it. Based on prior work, this is roughly a census of the active workers in that period. So there, like I said, there was 10,000 workers and about 1,400 workers added at least one edge. Now, if I was in the audience, I'd be like, wait a minute, Sid, what are you talking about? There was 10,000 workers and only 1,400 added one edge. So 86% of this network was isolated and only 14% had an edge. Like, why are you showing me this? And the answer is the following. That network you see in the middle, those are the super Turkers. Those are the 20% that do 80% of the work. So when you put a task on Turk, you're more likely to be sampling from that network than you are from those isolated nodes on the edge. So as you can see, I've also colored the edges. Now, what gives with that? When you added someone's nickname, you also checked a box saying, how do you communicate with them? And it turned out 90% of all the edges were communication through an online forum. So workers have their own off-platform online forums, mTurk Crowd, Turker Nation, Reddit, et cetera, and Facebook, and we color-coded according to those different forums. And you can see each little cluster corresponds to one of those forums. Let's see, I got 35 minutes. Okay, and so what do they talk about on these forums? Well, unsurprisingly, they talk mostly about hits. And what you can see is that they do talk about life and give each other some social support, less so on Reddit, but more so on the other platforms. And also, communication on these forums wasn't the only way they communicate. A good fraction of them also communicate through one-on-one channels like email or IM. And what you see here is that when the blue bars are the communication on the forum, predominantly are about hits. The red bars, the communication on these one-on-one channels, a little bit more about life and giving each other social support and that kind of thing. But here, this next one is really the point. What is the benefit of being in this network? And this graph shows it. Recall that there was about 10,000 workers who did the task. So what we did was we bin them in terms of, we bin them in groups of 200. So the leftmost X on this screen, I don't know if you can see my mouse, probably can't. The leftmost X is the first 200 workers. The second X from the left is the next 200 workers. The third X from the left is the next 200 workers. And there was, like I said, there was 10,000 workers. So the rightmost X is the 50th X, is the 50th group is of 200 workers. And the Y-axis is of those 200 workers, how many were connected, how many were in the network. And the black line is just the OLS regression line. And what you can see is that the early workers were more likely to be connected than the late workers. What does this mean? The hit that we did, like I said, it paid $1. It only took a few minutes. Workers genuinely enjoyed it. We got a lot of fan mail about it. And the connected workers were more likely to hear about it first. So if we would have stopped our hit early, we would have had, a really disproportionate amount of connected workers, and the disconnected workers wouldn't have heard about it and would have gotten crowded out. So there's an economic advantage conveyed to being part of this network. Okay, so just to review, we talked to the workers, we found they collaborate, then we map this network. Now, what are the effects of this network? And that's what I'm going to show on this next slide. We did another task, and this task was probably the simplest you could imagine. We said, put a pin on a Bing map wherever you are. That's it. And then we said, how did you hear about this task? Did you hear about it through generally searching the mTurk site, or did you hear about it through an online forum? And we ran this hit for 5 weeks. On the x-axis here, I'm showing every 8-hour period for that 5 weeks. On the y-axis, I'm showing the number of workers that came and did our hit during that 8-hour period. The black part of each bar is the number of workers that came during that 8-hour period who reported saying, yeah, we found this task through an online forum. The blue part are those that came from searching the mTurk site. And what you can see right off the bat is these huge spikes, right? And what you can see whenever there's a huge spike, there's a huge black component to it. And that's because these huge spikes what drove these huge spikes are people from the online forums. In fact, you can go back to these time periods on these forums and map them back, and you can see the posts in these forums that drove these big spikes. That's one thing. Second thing, if you ignore the spikes for a minute and just look at all the other bars, the blue components are roughly the same size. So basically what's going on, there's a uniform amount of workers that come from generally searching the site. And then there's these big spikes driven from these forums. So this is an evidence for this micro to macro problem that happens in that sociologists love. It's like we talk to workers, they say they communicate, we map the network. What are the effects of the network? This bursty traffic pattern. Okay, yeah, I'm gonna start to wrap up a little bit. So like I said, what did we find? We looked at our anthropology data, it told us what to measure. We made various quantitative measurements based on those. Just to summarize, why do people do ghost work? To earn money, to be control of who they work for, what they work on, their schedules, self-improvement, build their skill set. How do you get the work? You got to be on call. How does the work get done? Collaboratively. Slightly higher level takeaways that I'd like you guys to walk away with. If you think about this platform for a minute, it's a very sterile environment. MTurk strips away everything that we associate with a job except for the labor and the pay. There's no benefits, there's no health insurance, there's no after dinner drinks, there's no lunch buddies, there's no weekend softball team, all of that's gone. But the workers at their own expense built back in the social connections that the platform has stripped away. And in doing so, we saw evidence for this micro to macro phenomenon. The workers talk, they self-organize into a network, and that resulted in this bursty traffic pattern. Putting that another way, a crowd is not a collection of independent individuals. A crowd is a network where the edges are hidden. Requesters have most of the power in these on-demand markets. Workers have to work to find good work. They have to bear the costs of that, and they collaborate, they talk to each other to mitigate that transaction cost. Looking forward, I do believe on-demand labor will become a part of the future of work. Now, just bringing this back to current times for a minute. Post-COVID, I think what's going to happen is as the economy spins back up, after COVID, a lot of businesses, especially small businesses, had to lay people off. As the economy spins back up, we're going to see, are these small businesses going to be turning to gig workers to scale linearly with their revenue or not? And I think if they are, that's going to be a big opportunity for this kind of work to take off. Simultaneously, AI systems are going to continue to grow in their popularity and impact. That's not going to change. Training data is going to be here for a little while, at a minimum. I think it's in the best interest of society and the workers and requesters to understand the dynamics of ghost work, to make sure that we're giving the workers a fair deal. And with that, I'm just going to leave you with one sort of parting thought. In the book, we talk about the paradox of automation's last mile. And it's a very simple idea. And it's not even a new idea. At any given moment, there's a set of problems machines can solve. And if you rewind a few years ago, image recognition was outside of that set. And you needed humans and machines working together to solve it. Then there's an innovation like deep learning, and then image recognition becomes a problem that machines can solve alone. So the set of problems that the machines can solve grew. Okay, well then there's always this new frontier of problems then that we now want to solve, and we need humans to help us. So right after that problem was solved, researchers and scientists went on to problems like video recognition, or how are two objects in an image related to each other. And the point I'm making here is there's going to be this ever-growing frontier. So there's a lot of rhetoric, are the machines going to come and take all our jobs? And quite frankly, I don't think that's going to happen in my lifetime, and I don't think it's going to happen in my son's lifetime. So rather than focusing on like which endpoint and trying to guess which endpoint we're going to get to, what I'd rather do is focus on the here and now and make sure that the workers are getting a fair deal, so that wherever we do end up, we can say as a society, well, we got there in a way that we were comfortable with, and that we treated the humans that power these AI systems fairly. Thank you. I'll stop there. Happy to take questions.
That was awesome. I have to take some liberties because I had so many. This is such an interesting developing area, and you're obviously somebody who knows a lot. So I'm just going to take some liberties and ask some questions that came up in my mind and ones that I've had burning in my mind. So obviously in society writ large, we've got this conversation going in general about how we treat workers. You know, we've got a big debate about whether Jeff Bezos is doing a good thing by blocking the unionization of his workers. We've got a debate about the minimum wage. We've got a debate about the universal basic income. And so my question to you is, do you see organizing going on in the labor market beyond, you know, like messaging to share information so that you know which tasks to do and how much to charge, and do we see, is there an organized labor of ghost work? Is there a political opportunity for unionization of ghost work and gig work? You know, obviously it goes beyond MTurk. There's a whole gig economy out there where this question is really important. So that's kind of my first question. Let's just start there, and I have at least one more, and I'm sure there are many others, so I won't take too many liberties.
So a couple points there. So I think my gut is, so there have been various efforts to help, let me rephrase it. There have been various efforts to unionize the workers, and they've generally failed. And I think, I don't have great interview data here, but from the data I do have, I think the workers kind of see through it. That whoever's doing this organizing is not organizing it on the workers' best interest, they're organizing it on their best interest. And so they're like, yeah, this is not for us. So I think whatever approach, I think the right approach, if any is to be taken, I think the right approach is to help the workers help themselves. Don't be patronizing and paternalistic and think you know what they need. Help them help themselves, I think, is a better way to go and would avoid some of the problems in the past of this. Now, let me just answer your question a little bit more broadly. The social safety net in the United States is tied to full-time work. There is no, the API that does this kind of work completely skirts hundreds of years of employment law. And that's kind of why the workers are in the situation they are. And that's actually at the heart of your question. And this technological innovation just like came out of nowhere, and the law moves very slowly. And now here we are, and we're trying to figure out, okay, what's the social safety net for these kind of people?
And is this different from, say, contractors? I mean, there's a distinction between contractors and employees in the non-gig economy. And are these folks even to the level of contractors, or not even? No.
Sadly, no. There's this talk. So Mark Warner, senator from Virginia, I don't know much about the guy, but he has some very advanced thinking along these lines. And I was lucky enough to be in the room with him once. And I think there's, like, if I remember right, there was either 7 or 9, let's say there were 7 criteria by which you need to be considered a full-time worker or a contractor. And gig workers exactly solve 3.5 of them. And it's kind of like, crap. Now where do we go? We can't even like round it off. Like, I don't even know where this leaves us. So yeah, that's kind of that situation.
Dave, do you want to marshal some of the questions? I see them coming in. I definitely don't want to monopolize here. I do have another question if there aren't any.
Yeah, sure. There's a few. So one question, which I think is sort of similar to your, I think a couple of the questions kind of build on yours, Sinan, but I think one which is related is, Sid, do you have any thoughts on how, we can move to an equilibrium in which these workers are better compensated for the work that they provide, especially given how important it is for all of this highly valued machine learning work that's happening?
So a few different ways, and I actually think 3 different ways, and they're not mutually exclusive, and I also think we have to go down all 3 roads. Number 1 is the road I mentioned to Sinan. I help the workers help themselves. If they want to unionize, if they want to take collective action, help them do that for themselves in whatever way they think is best for them. That's a more grassroots worker side. Second way would be the laws. change the laws, lobby Congress, write to your Congress people, that kind of stuff. That takes time, but that's the downside. The upside is it can have a broad impact. You know, California's already got laws about this on the books. But then there's a third way that that is underutilized. The requesters have all the power in all these markets, and that's pretty much true across platforms. And a lot of people say boo-hoo, and they cry about that. But I actually want to flip that on its head for a second. We interviewed, I have a paper about this with Katie Lustig. We interviewed Microsoft employees that hire Upwork workers as part of their jobs. And basically, across the board, the Microsoft employees, they want to do the right thing, okay? So you're a Microsoft employee and you want to hire a developer in Romania. What is a fair wage for them? I honestly have no clue. Do they get socialized medicine, retirement? I have no idea. Should I be factoring that into my pay rate? I have no idea. There's no tools to help that person who wants to do the right thing buy the worker they're hiring. And so, but because requesters have all the power, a little bit of tooling here, a little bit of data here can really help them feel good about their decision about who they're hiring. So that's a third way. And I've spent some time talking to platforms because Microsoft has a very privileged position here. A lot of platforms want our business. So I've spent some time working with these platforms to say, hey, if you do this, you will get us and more companies wanting to put our work on your platform. So it's in your best interest. And after some spirited discussions, let's put it that way, made a little progress.
Awesome, thanks. Another question here, and then Sinan, I guess you can jump in with yours. And a reminder for everyone else, if you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. But I guess the next question was, Sid, do you know of countries in the world that are sort of forward-thinking in regulating this type of work? So even if the US maybe has not done a good job yet, are maybe some of the countries where a majority of the workers are located doing more on that front?
That's an amazing question that I don't know the answer to, but it's such a good question. I might spend some time thinking about that. Like here, hey guys, here's a model. You know, that's no answer. No, I don't know. Yeah, I'm gonna look that up.
Yeah, I mean, just as you do your research on that one in the future, I'd also piggyback and just supplement that question with what happens if there is a law in Romania about how these workers need to be treated and they're being hired from the United States? Is there some sort of need for some harmonization or
So right now platforms just have to handle that literally on a case-by-case basis. Like, side note, so platforms literally have to handle that on case-by-case basis. Like, okay, you know, you're hiring, I'm a platform, you're hiring someone in Romania, I have to make sure that that law is being obeyed. One thing. Second thing here is there's some unintended consequences here. You know, California passed AR5, you know, talking about gig workers, that kind of thing. An unintended consequence that I've informally heard from some platforms is they're just like not putting workers from California on their platforms. It was just getting compliance, getting all that was too much work for them. So they just said, forget it, we're not doing that. And so like, I don't think that law was passed with that in mind, but it happened. So we have to be really, really careful here.
Cool. I was going to ask a question about, I feel like you have done work on this in the past. I know work on this has been done by various people that I know, that we both know. What about the quality of the work and the concentration question, how they're related? In other words, is it true that do high quality workers have more market power than the average worker? And does that counteract the requester's power in any way?
Do high quality workers have market power? So one of the papers I wrote with Sarah Kingsley and Mary, Sarah's an extremely talented graduate student at CMU. is saying that this market power we're talking about here is a reason for the poor, for what people see as the not great work, because it depresses the wages, and so there's no real incentive. And you know, good, if you're a good worker, you're getting a low wage, and you know, bonuses are pretty rare, that kind of thing. So it kind of depresses the quality. So that's one thing. Second thing is, yeah, I've done a lot of experiments around how to incentivize higher quality work, and the answer is very simple. You pay for it. You don't just pay more. You just say, like for example, okay, let me back up a minute. There's two kinds of tasks: effort responsive tasks and non-effort responsive tasks. Non-effort responsive task would be like, is this email spam or not? You know in 2 seconds if it's spam or not. Another non-effort responsive task is like handwriting recognition. Me staring at Sanan's bad handwriting for hours and hours and hours, I'm not going to decipher the word. I either know what the word is in a second or I don't. No matter how much more effort you put in, you don't get any payoff. So for these kinds of tasks, paying more, incentivizing in any clever way, it doesn't really work. Then there's things like effort responsive tasks, which are like finding typos in text, because you can read more carefully, you can Google more words, you can take more passes. That kind of thing, you can incentivize for higher accuracy. So that's one thing that people don't talk about. They blame the workers and this and that. Guys, look at the task. If you put in more effort, are you going to get more accuracy? If the answer is no, then blaming the workers ain't the issue here.
I wonder whether, you know, like a difference between a Turk and like an Upwork or something like that, where there's more sort of complex tasks potentially than what are typically thought of as human intelligence tasks.
Yeah.
Whether some of these quality issues and market power issues start to come into play a little bit more.
I haven't seen a great study about quality on things like Upwork, but definitely the market power on Upwork is for sure there. Yeah.
Cool. I'm not sure where Sinan went. Another question that someone asked, do you have a sense of what a typical or average annual salary is for like a ghost worker, and or the number of hours that they tend to work per week?
It's gonna be so the average here is not gonna be a great summary statistic, because it's extremely heavy tailed. There's the hardcore that work, you know, 20, 30, 40 hours a week. It's their job. And then there's the people that sort of fade in and fade out that just do a couple hours a week. So it's going to run that whole gamut. There's people for whom, you know, they get, you know, 1099s in the mail from Amazon and that kind of thing. And this is a substantial part of their income. And there's people for whom it's not. So that's certainly true. In that study I pointed out that's under review, we did 100 workers. Our average pay rate, I believe, was about $4 or $5 an hour. And but if you take into account the transaction cost, it reduces it by about $1 an hour. So yeah. But more experienced workers got paid more because they were more skilled, more experienced.
Cool. I think one last question, and then we probably will want to wrap up. But do you think that the COVID-19 pandemic will have a lasting impact on the type of work and the appetite of workers to not re-enter the workforce?
Yeah, I think COVID-19 is going to be a big canary in the coal mine. Like like I said, as the economy spins up, if this work sort of continues, if this work takes off, then I think it's going to skyrocket. And quite frankly, if after post COVID-19, if this work kind of doesn't, it I see it kind of just staying at a sort of static level. Yeah, because I think the COVID-19 kind of set the stage for on-demand work to kind of be extremely relevant to companies that are trying to scale back up. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it looks like we're just about at one, so I'll maybe I don't know if Sinan has some final words that he wants to.
Just to thank you, Sid. This was awesome. Really appreciate you. Hope you remain well, and I look forward to more of this research from you, because I think it's super important. This is such a growing and important part of the economy, and something that we really have to stay on top of.
Thanks, Sinan, for having me. Thanks, everyone, for spending the last hour hearing about my work. It's an honor. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Sid. And just a reminder for everyone, we don't have a seminar next week, but the following week, Michael Strage will be talking, I believe, about recommender systems. So we will, notify you about that talk in your inboxes. But thanks again, Sid. Super cool talk.
Thanks, guys.